Excellent. So hey everybody, my name is Dan Illson. I'm one of our cloud solution architects here in the cloud services group. So I actually have a couple talks today. Thankfully they've been kind enough to schedule them both in a row so I don't have to find the theater again, which is really nice. The first one we're going to talk a little bit about integration between native AWS services and our VMware Kubernetes engine offering. Okay, so we announced that into public beta a couple months ago. You guys have heard of the Kubernetes engine or VKE before? This is something you've seen previously, or is new topic? Here, new topic, okay. Great. So, as we talk about cloud services here at VMware, what we're trying to build is a couple things, right? We're trying to build a portfolio of services that give consistent infrastructure presentations and consistent operations across multiple cloud environments, okay? In the case of something like VKE, what we're talking about is a consistent Kubernetes cluster implementation and presentation across multiple cloud regions and even multiple cloud providers, okay? As a fully managed service. So this is easy button Kubernetes, right? It is give me a cluster, please, thank you, okay? So looking at the portfolio a little bit, right? You guys have heard of PKS, I'm sure. We've made several big announcements around it and a lot of noise. PKS very much falls in the spectrum of people who want to manage and maintain their Kubernetes environment themselves. Typically we see this most on-prem, but we'll see it some other places. VKE is a complementary offering for a different sort of user. It's the sort of user that says, I just want to consume this capability. I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time building it, building an infrastructure practice around it, and making sure I have all those base operational capabilities built in. I just want to be able to use it to start deploying workloads as fast as possible. That's who VKE is really for, and we're going to look at it a little more in the context of this talk. So, important as we talk about connecting out, in VKE we define two types of clusters, right? We define a developer cluster, okay, which doesn't get the same level of isolation. It's designed to be stood up quickly, torn down quickly, use a minimal resource footprint, right? It's designed to be a small but fully Kubernetes conformant implementation. The production or enterprise cluster, on the other hand, has a little more configuration to it. This one is isolated specifically to its own VPC in Amazon or its own VNet in Azure, right? And the idea here is with this strict isolation, this is the sort of cluster that has its own networking space, its own IP range, and I can now, based on that unique IP range, peer it out to other VPCs, other VNets, and other native services, right? Specifically today, we're going to talk about Amazon and those sort of, those constructs and those services that are available, but the same tenets will hold true as we move into other cloud providers. Okay? So going into that production cluster, we're going to blow up the view a little bit more to look at some of the individual componentry, right? So, as I mentioned, the production clusters are isolated within their own VPC, and you can kind of see that here. We have two next to each other, and you can see that they have a VPC isolation band drawn around them. So like any Kubernetes cluster, right? They're made up of pods. Those pods are made up of containers. Those containers and pods are organized into namespaces, exactly what you'd expect to see from any other Kubernetes implementation. In terms of VKE from an infrastructure perspective, as we deploy these clusters, we deploy them, a production cluster, across 3 different availability zones, okay? This is done for automated and built-in HA and for some additional resiliency. It's also done so that we have more worker nodes available to those clusters as we spray them across multiple AZs, okay? Very important. To integrate with outside services right now, you have to use a production cluster. You have to use a production cluster again because we want that strict network isolation that comes with a cluster living inside its own VPC. Right now, the developer clusters don't have that strictness of isolation, so their networking range might conflict with other things if you tried to peer them out. We don't want to introduce that sort of problem, so we only expose the peering capability inside the development or the production clusters themselves. I'm sorry. Right? Because we are deploying Kubernetes for you, right, there's a bunch of ways to access a VKE Kubernetes cluster, right? You can go through a web UI, which gives you direct access to the Kubernetes UI, right? Okay for administrators or for testing some stuff out. not honestly the way most development professionals we run into interact with it, right? The other thing is we have a CLI package that wraps our API that's available for command line usage for things like creating new clusters, defining IAM policies, defining new users and groups, those sort of operations. And then through that CLI, you can merge your credentials so that you can get direct kube control access on the command line into that cluster itself, right? Or you can always hit the raw Kubernetes API endpoint if you want. You have a bunch of options in terms of how you're going to be able to interact with these clusters or get into them. Okay. Now, that's good to help set the table a little bit for the service and how we've built it and what it looks like. But as we get to the meat of this talk, it's right. How do we interact? How do we take these clusters, deploy some applications on them, and interact with other native Amazon services, right? So the way we're doing this today is through AWS VPC peering, right? Pretty standard mechanism for those of you who are in or use AWS. We have some other connectivity options that we are trialing and prototyping. We'd like to continue to offer some other connection types outbound as well, but today, right now, it's VPC peering in the public beta builds that we have. The demo example that I'll go to here in a little bit is actually an application with a web front end, an API server living on a VKE cluster, and then it's using RDS as a database backend, right? So we're writing and reading out to an RDS database instead of containerizing our own MySQL instance, for example. But we could also do this with S3. We could do it with writing to Lambda functions or any of the other native services that provide an in-VPC endpoint that we could route to across the VPC peer, right? And again, this is a methodology for doing so within the private space within Amazon. We could always interact with these things via public endpoints if we wanted to, using the VKE cluster ingress and egress out through an internet gateway to the internet. It's always a valid option, but we know for some of our customers, certain types of traffic and certain application profiles they're not going to want to have transit the public internet. In that case, fine. This is why we work on some of these back-end connectivity pieces to make sure that we have other options for you that don't necessitate the internet gateway. Okay. In this case, we've drawn it out a little bit from a block diagram perspective. So VKE operates on a concept of shadow accounts, or essentially accounts that we provision for the end tenant or end customer. And then a customer, almost always, right, will have their own AWS accounts that they own as well. So if you think of service space in green and customer space in blue, in terms of the rectangles there, that will help. And then what we're doing mechanically from our side is, on the service end, we don't give the customer direct access to the underlying AWS account in VPC where their clusters are hosted. But what we do is, from that account, using either our API or our CLI, we can make a call out to Amazon itself to request a peering connection. Now, what we need to request a peering connection are the destination account and destination VPC ID, right? Which you as the customer can provide to your own account in your own space. And in that way, even though you don't control the account where the clusters live, you can still request a peering account or a peering connection back out to the space you do control directly, right? So mechanically, that's how we're going through it. Once that peering is requested, a customer or user will have to go into their account and accept that VPC peering connection before it becomes active. So you still have that administrative boundary of a developer might request a connection and might say, well, I want to run this peer back. And somebody responsible for administering the environment may say, well, we don't do peering like that, or we don't do peering to this VPC, but we do it to another VPC. Try redoing it over there instead. So we wanted to give some of that ability as well. VPC peers are layer 3 connections, so keep in mind it is going to be routable traffic. You will have to adjust your route table on the blue account or customer side to accommodate a path back to the cluster and to the VKE cluster networking space, right? So whatever we defined that as when we built the enterprise cluster, we will need to add that to our AWS route table. Again, it's privately routed within AWS, doesn't hit the internet when we're using this connection. We use security groups to protect the cluster on our side, and you can use them to protect your own assets on the account side you control as well. This will pick up intra-region DNS through Route 53. So important for, you can resolve all these things via DNS. And then per cluster, we can do a maximum of 50 peers. That's because 50 is literally the default AWS limit on peering connections out of a single VPC. You know, as always with Amazon limits, those can potentially be raised by filing a ticket, but there are no guarantees and you never know. So for safety's sake, we just kind of say 50 connections per cluster max. Honestly, I haven't had enough requests for people using more than 4 or 5, so I don't see anyone running into that immediately, but you never know. Someone will always come with a new use case we haven't seen, right? The big caution here, of course, is to make sure that you've picked cluster networking ranges that won't overlap with your VPC, with your customer-controlled VPC itself on the other side, right? So we do give you the hook to pick that network and specify it. Make sure you're picking something that's not going to cause a collision or an IP address overlap. Okay, this breaks it out a little more. Again, the idea here is just to show the flow of information from the cluster out to the AWS account. This RDS example pretty much wraps what we're going to do in a demo here and show today. We can also do, we can also really use this to connect different VKE regions together at a certain level, right? So if you think about it, we're deploying VKE clusters into different regions around the world. Today, US East, US West, and Ireland in the EU. But we could use this to join clusters together and allow services in different clusters to share information with one another. Okay. Always what you're going to need to start one off, you're going to need to specify an account, a VPC, a CIDR in the region of that account, right? This just walks through the steps of the connection itself. The big two that you need to worry about as a user are the initial specification and then making sure you accept the peer request before it becomes active. If you don't accept the peer request, it doesn't become active, it doesn't publish, it won't pass traffic. And you'll see that. The Amazon console itself will tell you if your peer is not active. And then you're going to need to change the routing table again, as I mentioned. Okay? So in terms of our native tooling, how do we interact with peering, right? So on the left side of the screen, I've pulled from our Swagger API spec the actual API command into the system to stand up a new peer. Well, this is to get a peer. So this is to view a peer. I pulled up the get method. You can see there the required things that we need to know about. We need the org name, which is essentially the tenant ID within VKE that's available on the console and easy to look at. And then the cluster ID. The cluster ID you can also grab from the console itself, or you can grab via our command line package. So we run that through a command. In the right-hand box here, these are from our actual command line package. You could configure a peer from there entirely without having to mess with the native API commands or go to the UI itself at all. You could interact with this entirely through the CLI to create a cluster peer with some of the options from above, and then view that peer once it's active and established. Okay. So we have short sessions today. So with the rest of the time here, I'm going to jump over and actually jump into my demo application that we've set up, and we can take a look at that. And then from there, feel free to ask questions as they come up. So what I'm doing right now, I'm going to our VMware Cloud Services console. So it's console.cloud.vmware.com to get to all of our services. Darn. And of course, that's on my phone, which is in my jacket. I knew I needed to think of something. But that's OK. So we go to this console because it's our landing point for all of our services. Excuse me for a minute as I bounce around here. Thank you, Doctor. I'll just keep it up here. That's OK. That way I know where it is. Okay. The always entertaining live demo. It has not broken yet. It still works. It just has more steps than were originally anticipated. But our security team will be very happy to know that everything is working as intended. Right. So from here, once I get rid of the GDPR bubble at the top, these are the services I have access to here from the console. Our console also provides some organizational level controls. So you can see here, I have an identity and access management where I can control all the users on our system and what they can access, and also look at my billing and payment methods. But today, we're going to bounce into the Kubernetes engine itself. We're going to skip that notice. So when a user logs into Kubernetes engine, this is the page that they land on, right? So from here, you can do a few things, right? One of the easiest, and we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, is to create a new cluster. So creating a new cluster in VKE is generally approximately a 4 to 5 minute process for a developer cluster, sometimes a little longer for production because it's replicating across 3 availability zones. But literally the optionality here is pretty small. You pick a version. If we're doing a production cluster like we would need for peering, we're going to specify our network ranges to make sure they're unique so we don't have overlaps. We're going to pick a region, give it a name, and hit create. Right? That's it. That's your input to setting up a Kubernetes cluster in VKE. Now, in this case, we've already set up a cluster, so I'm going to come here to our cluster list and go to prod 2, which I know is my Kubernetes cluster. And I'm actually going to go out to my Kubernetes UI. Oh. So this is our Kubernetes cluster UI, the same as if we deployed a cluster ourselves or through another method, right? In this case, it's a secured UI, so it's actually using my same login credentials and token that I used to get into the service to authenticate against this. So if I handed one of you the link to this cluster and said, go here, you would hit an authentication wall and not be able to get there. It's not open, exposed to the internet, right? So what we see here are my FitCycle server and my API server, right? So these are my web front end and API read end from the database that I'm looking at, right? And I can see that they both exist as deployments. And if I go down, I can see the services where they're listed. I'm running them both as node port services here, so they're easily accessible from outside. Right? And if I click through here, I can even see what endpoint they run on and things like that, right? So I have a nice overview of what's going on from that perspective. Now, this app's fully functional, and let's see. If I go to my AWS console, I can also see the RDS end of it. This was easier when I was on my own laptop, but. Yep, doesn't like that one. At any rate, okay. Trying to remember the most expedient way to grab some of this stuff off of here, but if I go to my, let's see, my one worker node here. Sorry? Can we do that? That'd be a touch easier. All right. That's back there. So from here, fortunately, I'm doing this off of not my laptop, so I don't have as many of my things loaded, unfortunately. But all of our VKE clusters come up with a default Nginx ingress controller. From that ingress controller, I get an easy URL to access the cluster resources, and then I node port them off of there. Thanks, Bill. Yeah. Sorry? Do we have a direct HDMI or?
Oh, you
that's fine.
USB. Just connect it to your.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. No problem. Good? Thanks, Bill. Always helpful when my boss comes to the rescue. So I'm going to interact with this directly through the UI, or through the CLI, sorry. So I'm going to come out here and I can do a VKE cluster list. And that'll look at all of the clusters that are listed in my current context. Now, the one I'm looking for is not here right now, right? But I happen to know where it is because I put it in a different project in a different folder in the hierarchy. So I'm going to run VKE folder set to set to a different folder, and then I'm going to do a VKE project set. To hop over to the correct project. From here, I want to get kubectl access into this cluster. And what I'll do here, so I'll do this in a way that's a little bigger. Let's see if we can get my font up a little larger. Let's do okay. Let's come up larger. It might be a little small for right now. So what I can do here is I'm going to do a VKE cluster merge. So this is going to allow me to use my login token to the service itself to get kubectl access directly into my cluster. It'll take a second to go, and then from here, all my standard kubectl commands become options for me to get and look at the running pods that we have. I would really like it if this would let me change my size up so that it's not so obnoxiously small. Okay. Doesn't want to take that, so that's fine. We'll keep going. But from here, we can see I have these pieces running. I can also do a VKE cluster peering list. And look at the active peer that I have. I can see I gave it a name. I called it FitCycle RDS and peered it out. Now that makes that easy. So if I want to look at my AWS side of the equation, this is much easier when on my own machine with all my credentials cached. I can come in here and I can look at the RDS side of the equation. And in this case, I have my single database instance out here that I've called FitCycle RDS, right? Now out here I have basic stats, but here I have my reachability and my endpoint. And you can see that this endpoint isn't publicly accessible. So I didn't expose it publicly at all. It's only exposed through the endpoint here at this DNS address that's running inside my VPC. And I've specified a specific VPC for it to run in. We can see that down here in the VPC ID. All right? I can actually jump to that VPC and see not only the endpoint itself, but I can look and see the peering connection that I have that's been advertised to me back from VKE, right? So here's my peering connection. And then to make that peering connection actually, to make the clusters actually reachable from outside, if I grab my route table associated here, we can see that I've had to add a route entry to 10.1.0.16, which was the cluster address range that I specified for that cluster. So I added that route to my route table, and I gave it a target back over the peer connection. So that PCX identifier represents a peering connection here inside AWS. Now, once I have that stuff, the rest, testing the app becomes easy, because I can come here and do a VKE cluster show command to get details about my cluster itself. So this will tell me everything I need to know in case I've forgotten what network ranges I specified, any other information. But for my purposes right now, it lets me grab and look at the public-facing URL for the ingress controller. And I want that because using that and the known port numbers that I configured into the application, I can go and look at the actual web front end of my application and also look at my API server. Now, if I go to the root of my API server, it tells me I'm not looking at anything interesting. But if I follow the path that they want me to follow, this is our application. This is it reading out of the RDS database itself and just doing a dump of what's in the table, right? So just to show that it's not entirely smoke and mirrors, right? If Mr. Shetty here in the audience wants to show up in the table, right? I sign him up through my interest form. And if I come through here and reload my database, he appears here in the bottom. So we have not staged it all for dramatic effect. Some of it does actually run. Fit cycle lives again. So that takes us to the basic walkthrough of setting up that peering connection out and getting access to some of these external services. I think I'm about to run out of time here. So if anybody has any questions, happy to take them. If not, okay. Yes. So the question from the gentleman was, is there any VMware footprint required here to run any of this? For VMware Kubernetes Engine, no. So VMware Kubernetes Engine is a fully managed SaaS service. It does not require an existing VMware footprint. It can run it. It runs entirely on cloud infrastructure, and it is a consumption model only rather than a management and consume model. Yes. So whether or not you have a big vSphere environment, this is something that's available. And again, it is all reachable from the new Magic. Yes, we all go to cloud.vmware.com, and then from here, if you dig into the products and services, you'll start to see more things. You'll start to dig in and see individual services. If you come on this offering, and actually Kubernetes Engine is right here under the next gen apps. From here, you'll see basic overview, key capabilities, but also the always wonderful request access button. If you'd like to get in and try this out, please go here, put in your name and contact information, and they'll be happy to reach out to you and figure out a way to get you onboarded onto the service. Thank you very much.